What's up, y'all? Let's dive headfirst into today's stories. So, some backstory. My freshman year of high school I was sexually assaulted by a peer, and so was another girl. I kept it to myself because we had a lot of mutual friends and I didn't want them to be uncomfortable or feel like they had to choose a side. I also felt like I was responsible, and it made me feel really guilty. I also suffered a lot of psychological repercussions, an eating disorder, I began cutting, I developed severe anxiety and depression. Finally it peaked and I forced myself to tell my English teacher. The police were called, I was interviewed. Already I could tell the detective was not taking me seriously. He also blatantly misquoted me in the statement and used words like misunderstanding and he went in for a kiss. Even though I made it very clear I struggled and tried to push him away, and he had me pinned to the wall with his hand around my throat. He confessed after 10 minutes of being interviewed by the police. The charges got dropped by the prosecutor because he felt the case would never go to trial. He was a star student and was very well respected. After this he was banned from speaking at school-sanctioned events. I was still quiet because I'm not a rock-the-boat type person. Eventually I found out he was planning on going to the same college I was going to. I wrote him a letter, asking him to please reconsider. He had said he was very sorry earlier. I told him in the letter to put his money where his mouth is and prove it. He never replied. A few weeks later I find out he's planning to speak at a baccalaureate event put on by a local interfaith community. I emailed the teacher in charge and told her what happened and politely asked her to not allow him to speak. She emailed back and essentially said that's terrible, I'm so sorry, we're still going to let him speak though, feel better. I'm livid at this point. I've been dismissed, belittled, ignored, and unheard for years despite my efforts to get justice. He's still incredibly popular and everyone loves him. I decide I've done all I can. I tried to take care of things on the DL, talk to him privately to come to an agreement, talk to the organizer to try and come to an agreement, they both ignored me just like the police did. So I decide I'm not going to be quiet anymore. I attend the baccalaureate event, and while he's giving his speech, ironically about treating others with respect, lol, I hold up a sign that says, redacted, has assaulted 2 women. Is this the face of class of 2020? Stop giving assaulters and abusers a platform to speak. Stop silencing women. By the time the event is over, everyone is talking about it, and everyone is pissed at both him and the organizers for letting him speak. Many of the girls there are victims of sexual assault themselves, and they are all furious that the organization knowingly let a predator speak. I feel incredible. It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. The last thing he told me after he'd finished violating me was don't tell anyone. And even after years had passed and I felt comfortable speaking about it to a select few, and the police knew, and all the teachers knew, he was still praised. And every time I heard someone talk about him fondly, I heard that little voice from deep inside me, saying, you're letting him win. Now that everyone knows and everyone hates him, I know that finally, I can lay this matter to bed. I can finally let go. My former workplace is trying to get a hold of me, about 1.5 years after I quit. They gave me a job offer that turned out to be a whole other job. Bad for them. It seems that they have a problem with Skatteverket, the Swedish IRS. It all started one day when the company told me they were installing GNSS tracking in our vehicles. They blamed Skatteverket wanting to know that we did not use them when off the clock. Well, that's kinda true, but in fact Skatteverket only wanted to know if we did, and if so how much. When I pointed this out to my boss, he went off on an angry monologue. Starting that us low-level workers couldn't be trusted, and finishing with that all we did was trifle away our work hours. So the statement from the company that they had no intent to follow us in real time was bullpoop. The problem for the company was that our union had already banned the practice of following us in real time, with a few exceptions. The tracking device installed was easy to Google and thereby even easier to figure out how to manipulate. The biggest concern was it was tamper-proof. So no opening it up. Well, since it used GPS/GLONASS as the only source for positioning, there was a simple bypass. After speaking to an old colleague of mine from the military, I ordered an antenna, $150, a Raspberry Pi, got my former colleague to find a good software, and created a GPX with a track going on every road in Malta. Thereafter I set the device to start via the 12V in the car and to simply tell the shy-leaded tracker that I was driving around in Malta. The effect didn't take long to show. After a week the boss told me my vehicle needed service. It did not. I knew when service was due. Another week goes by and it suddenly needs something else, can't remember. Both times they needed the car to go to another city, even thought our regular service station was in our town. After a month I got another car. The company blamed it on something with the lease. After that they didn't say anything at all to me about cars or anything else until the day I quit. Last day there, when dropping of my last things, the boss straight out asked me what I had done since everyone else's tracker seemed to work properly. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about, went outside and laughed my donkey off. Leaving the premise I meet a coworker who had always been really nice to me, so for about 2 boxes of snus he got the setup from me. Until today I thought this would be a petty revenge on a company that tried to illegally follow my whereabouts. But apparently they had sent in our tracks to Skotavyrkit. And well, they had some questions. Either their record were lies and they needed to go over all the records from the company, or they had to get all the paperwork for doing business abroad in before July. The rumor spread real quick and now the union also have a couple of questions. So about a month ago I applied for a sushi restaurant called Yoshi's and I got a text from their hiring manager, and we chatted about my availability, location, start date, yada yada. She then asked me to write a review of general Japanese food to show I knew what I was talking about and could upsell customers. Fine, I write a long review and send it to her. She then sends me a tiny link URL and tells me to post it there before I would be invited for an interview. I click it and what do you know? It's the Google page for a whole different restaurant all the way across the city. So I read the reviews, and they had done this to 30 or so people in the last 2 weeks at different locations franchised to the same crazy owner. I was pissed to say the least. This happened peak COVID in my state, people are unemployed at staggering rates struggling to feed their families, and these anuses are scamming potential hires for fake reviews. Being unemployed, I had some time on my hands so I screenshotted our convo and posted it all over social media. They went from 3.4 to 1.2 in a few hours with more than 70 new reviews about their poopy behavior. I was satisfied with that, and a report to the Attorney General here. But then I noticed, the owner had managed to get all the reviews removed, so at that point I went full nuclear. I contacted every media outlet, reported them to every oversight board, emailed corporate about it, and reported them to Google. I managed to get one of our local news outlets to cover it, and Google ended up removing all of their reviews altogether. This happened to me about 20 years ago while in college. I am being deliberately vague because reasons. Background. I got a job basically office sitting on weekends. I showed up at 8 a.m. and every hour I checked over things, handled the occasional phone call, and then left when the 4 p.m. person arrived. Most of the time I read, watched TV, or played games on my laptop. I probably worked no more 10 minutes of every hour unless something went wrong. It went on like this for years. The pay was decent, holidays were double pay, and I even had opportunities to cover weekday shifts when others were sick. One day while I was covering the midday shift, my boss asked me to come into his office. He told me that the evening weekday position was going to become available that night. He offered me the position which I accepted. I was told to punch out and return at 5 p.m. that night. The reason it went down like this should be obvious. Things went okay for a while. I showed up at 4 p.m., did the normal things, and then left at 12 a.m. when my relief arrived. It was a little more work, more call volumes, etc. Then, after 9 months, things started to go south. The daytime person developed a huge attitude problem and went from a nice person to a total Karen. She would complain about everything I did. For example, one time a system jammed up at a remote site and she called them. 5 hours later I saw the jam was still there, so I called that site again to see if they were still working on it or if something else was wrong, because the woman on our end who would be the one to help them was leaving soon. They did have a problem and so I hooked them up. My reward for making sure the problem got solved and not having to bother an upper level employee at home, on a Friday, just after having left work? I got yelled at because Karen complained that I had apparently ignored her log entry about the issue. My defense was ignored. The boss had me highlight important things on the log to verify that I had read them. Things plotted on for a while with this new normal. I tiptoed around Karen when needed, thankful for the fact I only had to deal with her for no more than 5 minutes. I did the stupid highlighting thing and my log entries started getting more and more detailed, even referencing Karen's calls when I had to follow up on an issue that crossed shifts. The firing. The following summer, just after I crossed year mark, I went on vacation to visit some friends out of state. When I got back, after about a week, my boss came down after everyone had left and had me describe how I did a certain task which involved certain updates. I explained to him how I did it and so forth. He then told me that I had not been doing it at all and that he was firing me. I had transposed the date code of the English file for the French file, which was the previous one. The newest one had already been applied anyway, so nothing was wrong. It was just a reason to get rid of me. So I left the office. My state is an at-will employment state, which means that I can quit at any time for any reason and my employer can terminate me at any time for any reason. The only exceptions were state and federal laws such as race, religion, etc. I thought I was screwed. So I just started applying everywhere I could. During my job search, I happened to accidentally stumble upon a link about employment law. Out of curiosity, I read it and discovered that my employer had shot themselves in the foot. In the employee handbook, there was a job security clause. What this stated was that they would never lay us off and such if our jobs were eliminated. We would simply be retrained and sent to fill an opening elsewhere in the company. It sounds good, but it resulted in them cooking up reasons to fire people to get around it. But their fancy, high-priced lawyers had missed something. In my state's laws, the ones passed by the legislature, I was screwed because of at-will. What they neglected was case law, the ones determined by courts. This site cited a case from the state Supreme Court that had ruled that a job security clause waived at-will on the employer side, turning it into a just cause relationship. This means that they had to have a real reason to fire me. The revenge. With that in hand, I sought out a lawyer. After my consultation with her, I set about collecting my evidence. My former boss did not realize that I knew more about this program than he did, seeing as I ran the same software on my own computer and laptop. I experimented. The date of the file, which they tried to use against me, is baked into the version 2. I was able to demonstrate to my lawyer that if I applied the same update over and over, which my former employer stated would change the date every day, would, in reality, display the date of the file. I showed this by backdating my own copy by a year using the update archive available from the vendor. Next, I showed her how the task used to be automated. A script would snag the file and process it every day on its own. A change on the vendor's site broke the script. It was an easy fix, but no one bothered to do it because the guy who had wrote it retired. The fix involved deleting 3 characters on one line in the script. The task was also marked as only being a weekday task. In my firing, I was told how important this update was and so forth. If it was so important, why was it not done on weekends or holidays? The vendor pushed out updates on those days too, as I showed my lawyer the one from Christmas morning. And why had the automation not been fixed? With all that in hand, she contacted them. After presenting them with the law they broke and all the evidence I had collected, they were forced to settle with me. So in the end, their fancy high-priced lawyers did not do their homework. I did. Thank you to the wonderful librarians I have known in my life who taught me my information literacy skills. They paid dividends in this case. Obviously, the terms of the settlement are confidential and, as far as I know, still in effect. It was a good portion of my salary though. I did also get unemployment during this time as well. I never found out how the reaction went down, as the main corporate office that would have dealt with it was in another state and I never had any contact with those people. I imagine a new handbook was issued before they cut my check though, so I feel bad for those who remained. Karen's fate was sealed about a year later. I saw a Facebook post by a former coworker mentioning that his job with them had ended, so I asked for details. The company experienced a huge loss in revenue. As a result, Karen lost her job as the site I had worked in was closed. Of about the 50 of us that worked in that office, only 10 or so were moved to another location. Thankfully, most of the ones I liked were old enough to retire. It did not take a genius to realize that my termination was simply a layoff disguised as a firing. What did you think? What would you have done differently? Share your opinions in the comments. And if you enjoyed the stories, slap that like and subscribe button for more of them, and don't forget to support the original writers with an upvote. Links are in the description. Peace out, and catch you tomorrow.